لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وقدوتنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم. اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Okay, away we go. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground today so that hopefully we can dedicate the next week's class just to women's issues. Okay, so we were talking about the essential elements of fasting, and we said that there were three essential elements of fasting, or perhaps themes. Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Themes, three central themes around which many of the issues of fasting revolved. Do we remember any of them? What were they? Intention. Okay, yeah, that was today. Very good. What about what we already covered? No, that's fine. That's one of the three. Intention is one of the three. There's not a whole lot to that. We're going to cover that today, inshallah. And there's two other things. Abstinence, right? What you're not consuming or partaking in, which was last class. We talked about different issues with that. And then timing, exactly. So if you're trying to categorize, and I'm a big categories guy, everything about fasting in your head, there's three things. There's timing, the fasting part or abstinence, and intention. Okay, so I'm just going to blaze through the intention part because there's really not that many issues, first of all. Second of all, they're not very controversial. You don't find a lot of difference of opinion on these sorts of issues. Or if there is difference of opinion, it doesn't have very high stakes. The stakes are quite low. So, and then we'll get to what comes after talking about the three pillars of fasting, which is talking about Fidya and Kaphara. Okay, and we'll get to what that is when we get there. So, the vast majority of scholars say that an intention is a condition to a correct fast. You cannot fast Ramadan without an intention. You can't fast any fast without an intention, technically speaking, right? This is the difference between starving and fasting. It requires an intention. How is that tension enacted, right? When does that intention need to be enacted? That's the next issue. We have the majority of scholars say that when it comes to Ramadan, the person has to have a specific intention to fast Ramadan. They can't just be having an intention to just fast in general, right? This is a similar issue to what we see in the rules of prayer. Like, let's say, for example, that you wake up and roll out of bed and you stumble into the masjid and you're not really quite sure which prayer you're about to pray, but you just join the line, right? So this is a famous difference of opinion or contentious issue. Does the person's prayer count if they're simply praying, they're going along with everybody, or does it require a specific intention? So this is the same sort of issue that we're talking about in fasting. Is it sufficient to just have a general intention to fast? Or does one specifically have to have an intention to fast Ramadan? The majority say you have to have a specific intention to fast Ramadan. Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, says no, just the intention to fast during that, and it happens to be that time and everybody else is fasting, is enough. When do you make your intention for Ramadan? This has a little bit more tafsir, details to it, right? So Imam Shafi and Ahmed said that when it comes to an obligatory fast such as Ramadan, you have to make your intention before Fajr. Okay, you can't wake up and then make your intention after you wake up. However, you can do this with a non-obligatory fast, and this is something the Prophet ﷺ would do. When it came to a non-obligatory fast, he would wake up and ask Aisha, "Hey, do we have any food in the house?" And she would say sometimes, "No, we have nothing." And so he said, "Okay, I'm going to fast then." Right? That's fine for anything that's not Ramadan. or I should say it's fine for an extra fast. But for Ramadan, the majority of scholars say that no, you need an intention before Fajr happens. Okay, but don't get hung up on this, because when the ulama, they talk about having an intention, there anything can suffice as intention. You don't have to sit up, in bed and say, okay, today on the 23rd of April, I intend to fast Ramadan and it's the 17th day of Ramadan. No, it's sufficient as an intention that you're preparing the meal for tomorrow. You expect in your head when you go down to sleep that the next day you're going to be fasting, and that fast is part of Ramadan. That is sufficient, inshallah, for an intention. And the final issue that has to do with intention, and this is more significant to married couples, does your fast count if you wake up in the state of janaba, of a state of major ritual impurity? Either you were intimate with your spouse and you fell asleep. Hey, good question. Is it, okay, so the Shaykh family says, is that intention good for the whole month? That's also an issue of difference. The majority said that this is something that has to be done every single night. Meaning, again, taking the realistic definition of what it means to make an intention, any sort of preparedness that you do, even just being mentally expecting, right, that you're fasting tomorrow, that counts as your intention. But yes, you have to go to bed with that. That has to be there for every single night. Malik was the only one who dissented in that particular issue. He said all you have to have is one time, and it suffices for the entire month. Yes, exactly. Waking up for the pre-dawn meal is a perfect example. Who could say that you're waking up for the pre-dawn meal with any other intention but fasting, right? So things like this count as your intention. Good. If you wake up in a state of major ritual impurity, such as you were intimate with your spouse or you had a wet dream, does your fast count? Yes, it does. Vast majority of scholars said that, all of the 4 legal schools. So there's no worries there. You can even if you wake up, that counts both if you wake up in a state of major ritual impurity before Fajr, but there's not enough time, you have to choose shower or sahur, and you choose sahur, right? Fast counts, no problem. Or if let's say you oversleep your alarm for sahur, and you wake up in the state of major ritual impurity, same thing. Fast still counts even if you start right then. Good. That's all the issues of intention. Okay, so that takes care of intention. Don't get too psyched out about it. Like we said, any sort of concrete action of preparedness is enough to indicate that you have the intention to fast. Merely the expectation in your mind or in your heart that the next day you're going to wake up early, setting your alarm is intention, right? Waking up for sahur is intention, and so on and so forth. Okay, the rest of the rulings that pertain to fasting, and we're going to go back to the style of Imam Abu Hanifa once we get into them, inshallah, has to do with 2 things: Fidya and Kaphara. Okay, what is Fidya and what is Kaphara? Fidya is something that is paid for someone in lieu of fasting, right, for a legitimate reason, a reason that the Sharia acknowledges. We'll get into what those are in a second. Kaphara is something paid as a penalty for breaking a fast for Ramadan in an illegitimate way. Okay? So a fidya is something paid for a legitimate excuse, and a kaphara is something that is paid for an illegitimate breaking of the fast. So everything that can break your fast, it falls into one of those 2 categories. Either it's legitimate, in which case you're paying a fidya, or it's illegitimate, in which case you're paying a kaphara. Does every single legitimate breaking of the fast require a fidya? No. Sometimes it merely requires you to make it up, which is called qada. But we'll get into that in a second, inshallah ta'ala. So who are the people who are the people that are excused from fasting Ramadan? There is consensus that the sick, the traveler, the pregnant women, and nursing women, and the elderly are excused from fasting. Now, there are some differences of opinion within some of those categories as to what exactly counts as sick, for example, what exactly counts as a traveler. However, just know that in general, those 5 types of people are excused from fasting. Okay? So the first issue that we come up to is, what is the type of sickness that counts? Right? Are we talking any sniffly nose? Are we talking, something that's as powerful as COVID? Are we talking about something that detains you in bed? What do we think? What type of illness, let's hear your thoughts, counts for a legitimate excuse to miss or break your fast? Yes, check. Harm, good. If we're going to reduce it, okay, if we're going to reduce it to a yes or no question, does something extremely light, such as a cold, permit you to break your fast? Say it, say no. Dana says no. Sheikh family says no. We're nearing ijma. Yes, the vast majority of scholars said what you said, that there has to be either harm or difficulty, like hardship, for somebody who is fasting. If they're going to be, this particular illness has to cause either harm or undue difficulty, undue hardship. There are, however, a small minority of scholars that said that anything that is called linguistically illness is a legitimate excuse for fasting. Why is it important to mention this? Because if you meet somebody who is not fasting, they break their fast for a cold, this is not an issue to die on a hill about, right? Yes, they're going against the vast majority opinion, but it is a legitimate opinion within legal circles. And so, even though it's better to follow the majority and safer, if somebody is really adamant about breaking their fasts for a head cold or for a headache or something like this, then, okay, that's between them and Allah. No problem. When is it permissible? So this covers the first category, which was illness. So anything above that, chronic, terminal, of course, anything like this, okay, no problem, breaking fast. What about the second category, which is a traveler? What is considered travel? When do you become a traveler? New Hartford is a distinct town from Utica. I live in Utica. If I just walk a couple blocks over to New Hartford, am I a traveler? Like, what's the rule? If I have a friend in Whitesboro and I want to have a sleepover over their house, am I a traveler? What does it take to become a traveler? Time and distance. Good. What time and what distance, Dana? You are right. Okay, yes, correct, Sheikh family. It follows the ruling for shortening prayers. 45 miles, which I believe is 89 kilometers. in the fiqh books, most of the world uses kilometers, so we learned it in kilometers, not in miles. 89 kilometers is the majority opinion. Abu Hanifa says travel of 3 days and nights, which is considerably longer than 89 miles. But the other three schools say 89 kilometers, which is about a day and a night's journey. However, there is a minority of scholars that said that, similarly to the illness issue, anything that can linguistically or culturally be called travel is a legitimate reason to break your fast or to join your prayers. Okay, so the same thing applies. This isn't necessarily what you should follow, because the great majority of scholars are against it. However, if you find somebody who is, a little bit lax in this issue, know that they have evidence behind them, they have scholars behind them, and so it's not an issue to die on a hill over. Yes, we'll get into that. We'll get into that issue if you're able to. Okay, so that covers distance. What about time? How long does one have to be staying in the destination location to be considered a traveler? At what point do you become a resident, essentially? After 3 days, after 14 days, IDK with an emoji. That's good. I don't know, Sister Mir, is half of all knowledge. So the Shaykh family is well versed in the Hanafi opinion. That is the position of the Hanafi school. 14 or 15 days, basically after 14 days, or you have 14 days, right, in a place before you're considered a resident. Whereas the majority, they say after 3 days. So again, valid opinion. So you're aware. You don't have to be rude or insufferable if you find people in your friends or in your circles that are adhering to either of these opinions. It's a valid difference of opinion. And that applies to prayer and to breaking your fast. Now, getting back to Sheikh family's question, what's better for a traveler or someone who is ill? If they're able to fast anyway, and it's not a big deal, is it better to fast, or is it better to take the allowance that Allah provided for them? What do you think? Oh, mashallah. I'm going to say it's getting organized. Number 1 for fast, number 2 for allowance. Either way is good. Okay, but what's better? You're right. Either way is permissible. Difference of opinion, of course it is. Everything's a difference of opinion. But I'm asking you to tell what's better. What do you think is better? There's a funny story at risk of derailing us. In some villages, the position of imam is like inherited, right? So I was told, no one equals wife, mashallah. Oh, there's a difference of opinion in the house. Oh, I see. You're saying difference of opinion within your household, mashallah. Okay, mashallah. So just to tell a story real quick. So there's a village in West Africa where the position of imam was inherited. It was passed down from father to son. But the problem was, in this particular village, when the father died, the son had not studied anything at all, had no idea about anything. And so the father's kind of friends and cohort, they were like, listen, you'll be okay. They're trying to talk him up. All you have to do, whenever somebody asks you a question, just say, well, there's 2 opinions about this. Some said yes and some said no. And so people were coming and asking, and he kept on relying on this answer, every single thing that they said. And it was working for a while. And then people started talking and, sharing their stories, and they figured out kind of his trick. And so somebody came to him and said, in Islam, are we allowed to worship idols? And he said, well, the scholars, they differed about this. Some said yes and some said no. And then they figured it out and they kicked him out. Okay, Sheikh family is providing a ta'lil, they're providing their reasoning. Good. If not, fast have to make up. So it's better to fast. There's something that's blessed about the time of Ramadan. Very good. This is one of the reasonings of the side that picked your opinion. So this is a famous difference of opinion as well between the majority and the Hanbalis. Okay, the Hanbalis say that it is better to break your fast because this is an allowance that Allah Ta'ala gave you. And Allah Ta'ala wouldn't have given you an allowance except that He preferred you to take it. And there's also a hadith that's agreed upon, hadith Jabir, in both Sahih al-Bukhari and Muslim, laysa min al-bar as-siyam fi as-safar, where the Prophet ﷺ said, it's not from piety to fast while traveling. And there is a hadith that is there's discrepancy over its authenticity, where the Prophet ﷺ is alleged to say, certainly Allah loves to give allowances and He loves that they are taken. So this is the Hanbalis' ammunition. They say, look at these hadith, it's clear. But there's discrepancy in the interpretation of that hadith that's in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. They say that the Prophet ﷺ said it's not from piety to fast, meaning that He's trying to show people in a similar way that He told them that it's not part of piety to stand out in the sun. That's not an act of worship that's doing anything for your soul. It's like you don't have to be a tough guy, basically. Like you don't have to, making it extra hard on yourself is not part of piety. So there's a interpretation where the majority says that, no, we disagree with how you've interpreted that hadith. The majority say that it's better to fast. It's better to fast for exactly the reason that the Sheikh family said, because something about the timing of Ramadan, the devils are chained up and the blessing is raining down, and all these sort of I don't want to say mystical per se, but metaphysical, thank you, that's the word I'm looking for. All these sort of metaphysical things are happening, and they're happening within the time frame of Ramadan, right? So if you're fasting, you're catching that. You're catching all of that goodness. And furthermore, you don't have to make it up later, which is more difficult to make it up later, especially outside of Ramadan. You've already had Eid. You don't really feel like it, all these sorts of things. So we can respect both opinions and not go crazy in defense of any particular one of them. Okay, we know that if a traveler were to leave at night and he's either on the road or at his destination the next day, we know that he does not have to fast that next day. However, what if somebody leaves during the day? Okay, so they begin their day fasting because they're a resident. And then around noontime, they get on a plane or get in their car and they drive and they begin their travel. Does the person have to complete that day of fasting, or are they allowed to break their fast in the middle of the day? This is something that we take for granted, but a lot of us don't know the actual opinions of the schools behind this one. I think the vast majority of us probably just like, of course you break your fast, right? I think that's the widespread practice amongst the Muslim community. Has anybody ever heard that it's not okay to do that? Basically, the long and short of it is, this is only the opinion of the Hanbalis. Oh, you usually keep the fast? Okay. Okay. Good. Interestingly enough, this is only the opinion of the Hanbalis, that you can break your fast in the middle of the day. And, you know, and that's fine. It's also some of the other Salaf, such as Al-Hasan al-Basri and Al-Sha'bi. But as far as the legal schools go, the majority of the legal schools hold that, no, you keep your fast. You keep your fast the entire day. And then if you're traveling, then you don't have to fast the next day. What about the opposite scenario? What if you're traveling and you're not breaking your fast and you arrive home? You arrive home, you know, at noontime. Do you keep on eating and drinking and for the rest of the day? Or do you have to, now you're home, do you have to fast? What do people think? Time of intention is gone. Oh man, I like that you guys cut right to the reasoning. So he keeps eating. MashaAllah. So we have two, Sheikh family and the Sayyid family, for keep eating. I feel like we can still fast. Okay. Oh, of course Allah understands. Eat. Okay, Dan. Thank you. I was waiting for you. Okay. Good. This is split down right the middle, or split right down the middle rather. So Malik and Shafi'i, rahimahumullah, they say, then he can eat, no problem, enjoy. However, Abu Hanifa and Ahmed were of the opinion that if he enters into a land or a place where everybody's fasting, that's his residence, that he has to fast. He begins fasting. And they compared it to an issue that we'll talk about with the women's specific session for women, which is menstruation. They made an analogy based off of menstruation. If a woman is menstruating and then she gets the sign of purity, some women get actually a sign of purity that's different from merely not bleeding anymore. If they experience that in the middle of the day, then it becomes obligatory upon them to fast. And I don't believe there's any difference of opinion in that issue. So Abu Hanifa and Ahmed are making an analogy from this situation, so we can understand and appreciate and respect both points of view. Whereas Malik and Shafi'i say, look, the time of intention is gone. What if you are fasting, traveling from New York to California? Which time do you use for fasting? Does it count as a full fast? First issue, if we're traveling, we're fasting, okay, we're on a plane. Okay. What is time? What is time? Time is is the relative motion of planets, right? The planet and the sun. So time is tied to that. What screws us up is that we look at we cheat with the watch, right? So we get confused, like, oh, what am I supposed to do? Like, now my watch isn't useful at all, right? So you go with what you see in the sky, and that's usually not very difficult when you're flying. And usually, especially today, they have, on the monitors, especially international flights. We used to do this. Actually, man, subhanAllah. That brings me back. One time, I flew back from Medina to the U.S., to Chicago, and I decided that it was Ramadan. It was the summer, and I decided I was going to fast because same thing like the Sheikh family said, I didn't want to have to make up the day after Ramadan. And subhanAllah, I ended up fasting like 36 hours or something crazy like this because of all of the, the stages of the journey and the way that the earth was rotating and this or that, the other. The day was getting longer, right, away from me. Whereas if you travel, like in your scenario, from California to New York, you're drawing yourself closer to the setting of the sun. I should say you're going away from, you're hastening the end of your day. And there's nothing wrong with that. You don't, just because you started your fast in California doesn't mean you have to end your fast at California time, right? So you follow the local time. And most flights today, especially international flights, they will have like local time on the monitor. And they'll have time at destination and time at point of origin or things like that. If you can't, it's not terribly difficult to follow the sun. We used to do that when we flew back and forth from Saudi Arabia to the US. Good. Okay. Now we're breaking into issues of making things up. Okay. Okay, we should say other types. So we covered now. Oh, thank you. Yes, I forgot about that. Does it say here? I'm hesitant to say. Let's see. I'm not sure. I need to look into that. What about extending the days of Ramadan? Example, going to India, they always 2 days behind Ramadan from us. Oh, so you start fasting. Do we then fast 31 days of Ramadan? That will come. That issue actually comes later in this chapter, which it doesn't look like we're going to have time to finish today. So in one sense, some of the ulama, just to give you the brief preview, some of them said, no, you can't, because the month can only be 30 days. Some of them said, no, you fast with the people, you break fast with the people. And this actually happened, not as dramatically as India 2 days ahead, but this happened in the time of the companions. I don't believe in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. I believe in the time of the companions, when one of the companions was traveling from Sham to Medina, if I'm not mistaken, and they had started the fast the day before or the day after or something like that. When they came back, they broke fast with the people when they were breaking fast. So it follows, and that would remain consistent with what we just said about traveling between California and New York. You're not going to fast on California time, right? It's the middle of the night in New York, and you're, still waiting to break your fast, right? Has to do usually with where you're at. Okay, we talked about different categories. We will eventually get to nursing and pregnant women. What about, before we get there, what about people who lose consciousness? Okay, this is a category of person that we haven't talked about yet. This is a more controversial category of person. Does a person who is in a coma, for example, for Ramadan, do they have to make up Ramadan or not? Let's distinguish between the two issues. Let's say here they were in a coma before Ramadan happened. They're in a coma the entire Ramadan. Do they have to make up that Ramadan or no? How are they going to pay someone to do it for them? They're in a coma. The majority say no. They do not have to make up that Ramadan. If they're in a coma before Ramadan happens, nope. Malik dissents. Malik says yes, they do. Okay, what about if someone loses consciousness during a fasting day? So they begin their fasting day, they're fasting, and then they pass out, or they go into a coma or something like this. That individual day, do they have to make that day up or not? The Sayyids follow the Hanafi opinion. Abu Hanifa said they're good, they do not have to make it up. Sheikh family follows the Shafi'i opinion, which says yes, they have to make it up regardless of the circumstances. And then everybody else, they kind of chop up the day. So Imam Ahmad, he says, if they even were able to get some of that day in, then it counts as a full day. And this might be an interesting parallel to the question that I didn't know the answer to earlier that the Sayyid family asked about completing days, right? If you've only technically done a partial day, does it count as a whole day? I'd be interested to see if they made a legal analogy here between this issue and that issue. Whereas Malik said that if he has done half of the day or more and passes out or goes into a coma after midday, then yes, it counts. And if it's less than that, then no, he has to make that one day up. Okay, so we know that if people who are ill, okay, and we're talking about illness that's going to, yes, definitely. Severe mental illness is the same here, takes the same ruling as unconsciousness, because one of the conditions that runs through all obligations and acts of worship is a sound mind or full consciousness, right? So if that becomes compromised, then the person is not responsible for performing the act of worship at all in the first place, which is why the vast majority of scholars said that if somebody is in a coma, or if we want to say has severe mental illness before Ramadan, then they don't have to make it up, because the condition or the prerequisite of such a thing would be completely gone in the first place. Yes, Muhammad. Oh, sorry, I thought you had something there for us. Very good. So we're talking about sickness. Keep in mind that we're talking about, and this gets back to something the Sayyid family mentioned, this is different from terminal illness, okay? Terminal illness and general being, elderly and frail is something that we can pay fidya, okay? Like we don't have to, they don't have to worry about making it up. That would be circular logic to demand that they make up something that they can't do in the first place, right? So when we're talking about, no problem. So when we're talking about illness and traveling, we're talking about an illness it is expected to recover from, okay? Now, if such an ill person or somebody who is a traveler, let's say they have 10 days that they have to make up. Do they have to make up those days consecutively because Ramadan is consecutive days? Or can they do one at a time? What do you think? Yes, one at a time. Very, very, very few scholars in the history of our tradition said that they have to be consecutive. Vast, vast, vast majority said one at a time is just fine. Okay, what if someone owes fasts from last year, okay, and they reach Ramadan for this year, and they still have those like 10 days that they never made up. and they were able to make them up. Key condition. Okay. We're not talking about somebody who, for example, pregnant and breastfeeding women who might be in a state for a prolonged period of time where they didn't have an opportunity to make them up without fear of hurting themselves or something like that. I'm about somebody who had the opportunity to make up those 10 days, didn't, and now it's Ramadan. There's no doubt that that person still has to make up those 10 days after Ramadan. And they can't make up those days and kind of like combine them in with the Ramadan that's now due upon them. But do they also have to pay a penalty in addition to that? Yes or no? MashaAllah, we have very good Hanafis here. So brother Muhammad, he's in the majority. Malik and Shafi and Ahmed said yes, that person has to pay a penalty on top of their making up those fasts because they let it go for an entire year with the ability to make it up. Whereas Abu Hanifa and the Hanafi madhab, they said no, does not have to pay a penalty on top of that, on top of what their qada, they're making it up. Okay, that issue I think we should talk about another time. That issue we'll talk about for the women's class. Okay, so somebody, how much is the penalty? It's feeding a poor person. It's the normal fidya. So that's very good. Good question, Mir. So let me backtrack and answer the Sayyid's question because this is something that is a good idea to answer now. What is fidya? Okay. Fidya, we said, is something paid in lieu of fasting in general for a legitimate reason. Okay. Fidya is not for necessarily if you've missed some days because you traveled or you were sick and you're going to get over that sickness. In that situation, you only have to make those days up. Okay. But what if you're terminally ill or you're chronically ill and you're not going to be able to fast? In that situation, in lieu of fasting, you pay what's called a fidya. What is a fidya and how much is it? The issue, you're going to find a lot of opinions if you go online, because the issue is they're tied to weights and measurements of foodstuffs that they used to use at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And on top of that, there's a difference of opinion as to exactly how much. I think the Hanafi madhab says a sa', which is a one particular measure of dates and barley or wheat or whatever. And then I believe the remaining three schools say a mud, which is a fourth of that. So it's a little bit different. So in our times, we have a question because it's much easier to pay cash, okay? So do we feed a poor person? So the normal fidya is a certain amount of food. There's a difference of opinion how much. Paid to one poor person per day of missed fasts. So if you're elderly and you're not going to make 30 days, then you have to feed one poor person 30 times, or you have to feed 30 poor people, one meal. Okay? Our days, we like cash, we like money, it's easy. Okay? Is it permissible to give a poor person or a needy person cash that's an equivalent dollar amount to the amount of food? Abu Hanifa says yes. The majority say no. How much is it? Many scholarly institutions, they go in between, say, like $5 and $15 per day missed of fasting. Okay. What's a nice little compromise? I was talking about this with Dr. Muslim the other day. A nice little compromise is a masjid acting as a wakil, acting as an agent of people who have to pay fidya, pay cash to the masjid, and then the masjid maybe purchases food and distributes food and things like this, much like we're doing for the Ramadan food drive. That would be a nice kind of mixture of the ease of Abu Hanifa's opinion and the caution of the majority opinion. Good. Okay. Is it required? We're running out of, we're actually overtime. Why do people fast 6 days after Ramadan? This is recommended. It's not obligatory. They're called the days of Shawwal, Sitta min Shawwal, the 6 days of Shawwal. So the Prophet ﷺ encouraged fasting 6 days of Shawwal, and the wisdom behind it is pretty clear, because when you while out and go party for Eid, it can be really easy to just slip back into those old habits. So 6 days in Shawwal kind of zaps that in the bud, right? It keeps you on your toes. It solidifies the progress that you made in Ramadan so you don't backslide. Does it have to be a poor person? Yes, it does. For Fidya, it does. It has to be the needy. It can't be the not needy. Okay, so a person who is elderly or unable to fast and they don't make it up, yes, the majority said that they pay the Fidya. And really, we're just going to have to stop here because we're almost 10 minutes over time. Which is actually okay, because then the remainder of the issues have to do with penalties. So what if we do a no-no? What if we break our fast? What if we're intimate with our spouses? What if we eat on purpose? And so on and so forth. That's what we're going to get into next time, inshallah. They don't need to fast. Are you talking about the chronically ill and elderly? No. Receiver of Fidya? No. Receiver of Fidya, they could have a medical condition. It doesn't have any bearing on whether they're an eligible recipient of food, whether they are fasting or not. They could be just like you, right? The important thing is that they're needy. Any other questions? Alhamdulillah. So next time, inshallah, we will finish the issues of penalties, and that gives us, I think, one remaining week, I believe, after that, which I guess we will dedicate to women's issues. We'll talk about period, menstruation. We'll talk about breastfeeding, nursing, and anything else. So that'll be, yes, inshallah. Okay, good. Thank you very much, everybody. Amin wa yakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.